Welcome to Alaskan Freedom.
This week we built a barn door, and we're going to show you surprisingly how cheap and easy it was to do.
So let's get started.
In 2023, we moved to Alaska to fulfill our dream of a better quality of life. Follow along as we transform our few acres of Alaskan off-grid virgin land into our dream homestead.
We are Jay and Eleinne, and this is Alaskan Freedom.
So a cheap pre-hung door is going to cost at least $150, and for the slab door itself, without even being pre-hung, at least $75.
But a nice one costs hundreds more.
So this barn door as is cost us about $270 to build, but we could have done it cheaper, and if you were to do this with a cheap paint, you could actually do this door for just over $200 about.
Let's talk about why you might want a barn door.
In our case, we have a 40-inch opening, which is very large, and if you were to put a swinging door in here, that would take up a lot of extra space regardless of which way it swung.
But with a barn door, it just slides and it saves up a lot of space.
The thing is with the barn door is you need a large enough wall to have the rail at the top at least twice the size of the door itself.
For the main door panel, we used 6 1x8s that were 8 foot long, and then cut them down to 81 inches in length. When laying out the door panel, you're going to want to move these boards back and forth and try to figure out which way they lay the best, so the edges line up together, the best possible scenario on each one. The sides of the boards aren't always going to be perfectly straight unless you're taking and planing them yourself. So just lay them out together and try different things until you find the way you like it. Once you get the layout for the boards that you prefer, then you're going to want to mark each board 1 through 6, or however many boards you have, to kind of remember how they're going to go back next time. And the best thing to do is keep that mark on the top side on the very bottom where later one of the other rails will cover it up. Otherwise you're going to have to sand it out later. Now you're going to want to measure across to find out how far the 3 boards that go across the top, bottom, and middle are going to be in length. Rather than cutting this ahead of time based on what it should be with the board widths, it's best to put them together like this and actually measure it and cut each one. Once you have the 3 boards measured and cut for across the top, middle, and bottom, then you can start working on the 4 boards that go up and down the sides in between. For the diagonal pieces, there's no technical way to cut these. Actually, there probably is, but I didn't bother with it. All I did was lay the board exactly where I wanted it and let it run long on each side, and then just took a straight edge and went right over top and scribed it so I had kind of an idea where it went. Went outside, lined that up with a saw, and cut it and set it right into place. I did this for the 1 large diagonal piece and then also for the 2 smaller ones. So after cutting everything and making a few minor adjustments, make sure all the boards fit together just perfectly and that the door is sitting square. Make sure you don't have any large unacceptable gaps. This will be your last chance to change anything before we start staining and putting it together. The day I needed to get the sanding done, it happened to be snowing outside, and living in Alaska, our days are short, so I had to take advantage of the time I had and ended up sanding these under the cabin in the crawl space, sitting on top of a piece of OSB plywood.
Before we stain the wood, I torched the sides, this part of the barn door, to kind of like make it like have that shadow effect or 3-dimensional. This one we just like stain it. When you're staining the top pieces, make sure you do all of the sides and the ends on the top, middle, and bottom pieces.
The stain and varnish or polyurethane we used ended up being quite expensive. We spent almost $45, I believe it was, just to buy the stain and the finish coating for this. This is one place you could cut back and save some money if you just wanted to use some cheap paint. We did a whitewash stain for the main slab of the door. The first coat we put on, we did not stir the stain good enough, and it came out more clear than it did white. And after realizing our mistake, we stirred it a little better for the second and third coat, and ended up getting just the color we wanted.
So we now have all of the board stained.
We have the plans that we drew up, which we're going to show on screen here, and now we've got them laid out per the plans, and we're going to start screwing everything together.
Now you want to put the slabs back in place the same way as when you laid them out the first time. So we're going to assemble this door from top to bottom. Once we got the 6 slabs in place and set up perfectly, then we take the top piece. In our case, we're using a 1x6 for the top piece. The rest of everything on here is 1x4. We're using a 1x6 on top because of the size of the hardware that connects to the top of the door. I'm trying to square up everything so this is sitting square, not crooked. Clip this right on the corner.
How? Like that?
So the center is on the corner.
Okay.
Yep. And then go to that corner over there and do the same thing. Let it go for a sec. Yeah, it's out of square, so. Over that one. Now we're sitting square. The screws we're using are a trim head screw, 1.25 inches long. These are 1x, so they're each just shy of about 1.5 inches in total thickness. So these are long enough to get through without coming out the other end. It's a number 8, 1.25 inch long trim head screw. We made sure to put in 2 to 3 screws every place that boards crossed each other, but we ended up having to come back and put a few extra in the top and the bottom. We ran the screws at an angle to give them more of a decorative look, similar to the X that's going to be in the middle of the door. But what happened is by only having one screw on the width of a 1x8 up at the top, that left a little bit of a gap on the one side that wasn't screwed. So we came back and screwed everything off. I would suggest doing your screws however you like the look on them, but make sure that you have at least 2 to 3 screws every place that these boards cross each other, with extra screws all along the edge. It's also best to take clamps and clamp everything together tight, so when you're screwing it together, there's not going to be any large gaps left. Now that you got the door square and the top piece is all screwed off, now just start working your way down and putting everything tight up against each other. And again, like I mentioned, making sure you use some clamps to hold these boards together before you screw them down. Now we're using an oil-based polyurethane or oil-based varnish finish. We went with an oil-based because the back side of this door is going to be in a bathroom where there's a shower with steam, and also because oil over time starts to give a little bit of a yellow hue. And this is the hardware kit we're using. We originally filmed this, but didn't realize we had our mics turned off. This kit came from a company called Tech. They gave us this kit to try out and do a video review on. We really did like the kit because it came with everything we needed, including the lock and the door handles and all the hardware. This kit from Tech is $49.99. There is a link in our description that will take you directly to this product if you want to try it out. As simple as this might seem, this was actually probably the most complicated part of this door build, was installing this recessed handle that'll go on the back. You're going to want a recessed handle because the door slides open up against the wall, so you don't want it to be hitting the wall. And to do this, you need to route out or somehow have a recessed hole to install this handle on. I've used routers before, but only for the edge of trim. I've never used one to do a recessed hole like this in the middle of something. So we took a plunge router that we recently got and did some test cuts first to make sure we got it right, and honestly screwed up 2 of them before we figured it out. But once we figured it out, it was pretty easy to do, and we set the plunge at the correct depth to be able to get this to go right in place. As far as the height of the handle, we ended up just going with the same height as the sliding glass window, which is very close to this barn door, just so everything looks uniform.
Then we got the door flipped over so we can put the hardware on the other side. Next, we installed the rollers that attach to the top of the door. The plans include accurate measurements for making sure you put these in just the right place. So when drilling the holes, first drill a pilot hole with a small drill bit, and then use a paddle bit to drill halfway through down and halfway through coming back up. That way you're never going all the way through one direction with the paddle bit and breaking out the wood. Then using a 16mm socket, just tightened everything up. And there's a couple pieces, I believe they called rail bumps, that attach to the top of the door with just a single screw. So we're going to drill a pilot hole through the top and then screw these in. The purpose of these rail bumps is just so that when the door is going across the top, if it gets pushed off the track somehow and goes up, the door doesn't physically hit the rail. And now also we'll put on the other handle that's on the other side of the door since we've got it flipped over. One thing in the plans is it talks about is measuring the rail off of the floor and to put your holes in for where the bolts will go. Now the thing is, if you do that, your floor has to be perfectly level, because if your floor is a little out of level and you were to measure these holes and then drill them off that, then this rail is not going to be level. And this thing moves so easily that if the rail was a little bit out of level, your door is always going to go one way or the other depending on how it tilts. So rather than doing that, you want to measure one of these bolts off of the floor, or one of the holes, as it says in the instructions, and then take a long level and mark a line where you're going to have the rest of those. And then you can measure from one to the other on that line to keep your rail level. So that way, no matter where your door is, when you let go of it or you stop moving it, it's always going to stay in position. Okay. Thanks, love. We ended up going 2.5 inches from the floor up to the center of one of our bolts, in addition to the length of the door. And the reason we're doing that is it is 1.5 inches from the top of the door to the center of the bolts on the rail. And then we wanted an additional inch on the bottom just because we're adding flooring later. But the plans do give you a general idea of how big this should be. It's basically going to be the size of your door, top to bottom, plus 1.5 inches, plus whatever distance you want on the bottom. And here's the kit for the rail. It's pretty simple. It's just 3 pieces. It's the rails, the lag bolts, and then the spacers. You're going to want to make sure with the spacers that the larger diameter part of it is up against the wall and the smaller diameter part is up against the rail. I found the best trick for putting these in was on the 2 end pieces. You'll have to actually physically put the lag bolt through the hole and then attach it to the wall. Once I got all the holes drilled, then I started installing the rail. With the other pieces, you can kind of put the bolt up there and one at a time put the bolt in and then slide the next rail up to the bolt and then put the following bolt in after it. I didn't tighten them all the way down. I just wanted to get everything up first and make sure that it was sitting level. Then you can come back later and tighten them all. You'll need to slide the next piece under the bolt head and snap it into place from the previous rail piece. fitting them together like a puzzle. Once the rail is fully installed, there's also a couple of stoppers that go on the rail that keep the door from sliding too far. And it comes with an Allen wrench to install this also, so you have the right size tool. This easily slides onto the end. You'll have to take the end lag bolt out of each side to be able to slide these on. And when you do it, make sure that the rubber bumpers are facing away from the wall. So when the door slides over, the hardware at the top is bumping up against the rubber pieces. And then the last thing we have to put in is the floor guide. It came with 2 floor guides. One of them requires that you route out a notch in the bottom of the door and then it's set onto the guide. We didn't want to use that one. We just used the one that has the 2 rollers. It attaches to a wall. It does not attach to the floor. And then the rollers are adjustable, so you can slide them in and out to get them so that they fit perfectly on the door how you want and then tighten them into place. You don't want the rollers to be so tight on the door that it barely moves. You're going to want to leave a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch of a gap on each side of the roller between the door and the roller to make sure that it doesn't hinder the movement of the door.
We're very happy with how this project turns out.
Yeah, we like it a lot. We made a few mistakes that we learned along the way. One of them was when we did the varnish, this is our first time using an oil varnish. It was dripping through the boards because the boards do have these small gaps. And then when we set it up to dry, you can see some drips here where the varnish dried. We are going to take some sandpaper, some fine grit sandpaper, and try to sand those down so you can't see them. Another mistake we made was our screw pattern that we originally did was decorative, but it was not enough screws on the ends to be holding the wood together good enough. So we had to put a few more screws on the end of each of these boards. There's 2 screws instead of just one. We had them at an angle, but we ended up having to have more across the top and bottom.
The kit also comes with additional hardware that you didn't use.
Yeah. There's 2 floor guides. There was the one we used, which has the rollers, which the door goes in between. And then there's this one also. You can use one or both. This one would be made where you could route out a 1/4 inch gap in the bottom of the door, and then the door would sit on top of this, holding it in place. We decided not to use this one, just use the roller system. And then also it came with spacers. So if you have a thicker door and you need it to come farther away from the wall, there are spacers that would go on the hardware kit up above to bring everything away from the wall another, it looks like about a 1/4 inch. And then a locking system, just an old school lock latch that would go on the inside that we are not using. It's just the 2 of us here, so we don't need a lock on this door.
We really like this kit because it comes with everything.
This kit is $49.99 from Tytech, and there is a link in the description below on where you can get one of these kits.
Thanks for joining us this week. I hope you guys enjoy it.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Beautiful colors. Good choice.